So I said that out of the total cost of 2 lakh, there was some cost which was allocated cost. That was the cost which actually arised in those particular respective departments, and that actually, for example, indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expense, which would be directly traceable to cutting department, that would be allocated to that. For example, I allocated 25,000 cost. Out of that 1 lakh cost, 25,000 was related to cutting department. And for example, all of the indirect material, indirect labor, or indirect expense, okay, that was actually been incurred in the machining department, that would directly be traced to machining department. For example, 25,000 was the cost related to assembly department, 25,000 was the cost related to stores, and 25,000 was the cost related to the maintenance department. So that was the breakup of that 1 lakh cost. Now, what would happen in the step of apportionment? I told you there will be some common cost. For example, 1 lakh was the common cost. And what was the breakup of that 1 lakh? Rental cost was 50,000 and power cost was also common cost. Power would also be a common cost, was 50,000 as well. Now, how I'm going to share that common cost? Rental cost on the basis of the floor area. I'll get one cost per square feet or per area, and then I'm going to allocate the cost as per the square feet they have. Yeah, benefit they take, they're going to take the share of that common cost. And in case of power, I'm going to do it on the basis of kilowatt hours. I can calculate the total power cost per kilowatt. Yeah, and then respectively, what would be the power usage in each respective department, what would be their own kilowatt hour, the cost would be allocated as per that. Yeah, for example, 50% of the total cost goes to cutting department, and 25% of the cost goes to assembly department. So that makes 75%, and the next 25% cost were related to the service cost centers. So that's how the total power cost of 50,000 would be charged amongst these, yeah, on some basis. So apportionment, first I'm going to do for the rent, and then I'm going to do for the power cost. For example, 50,000 was the rental cost and 50,000 was the total power cost. Now I'm going to share rent on the basis of floor area and power on the basis of kilowatt hour. Yeah. In this case, it's going to be power usage. Power usage in the form of percentages I wrote here. So, for example, again, 25,000 of the rental cost, I'm just assuming the figures, okay? You'll be given the figures in the data, and then you will be doing it. So 25,000, 25,000, 25,000, and 25,000. No, that makes, that doesn't make, let's make it 12,500 each, yeah? Then it makes 12,500 goes to cutting department, okay? 12,500, 12,500, okay? That makes 25,000, 12,500, and 12,500. That the total becomes 50,000 now. And now for the power cost, 50% of the total power cost goes to cutting department. I said 50% of the power cost, that makes 25. So just take 50% of the power cost. If you don't know the percentage, how to take the percentage, 50 divided by 100 into 50,000, that actually is 25,000. I can show it on the calculator as well on this side. See, 50 divided by 100 into 50,000. So it was 25,000. Now 25%. Okay. So what related to cutting department, assembly department, store, and maintenance? And maintenance department based upon their power usage. So I says 50% of 50,000 is 25,000, which is the sharing of the common cost. Apportionment of rental cost is taking place, and that will be apportioned, not allocated, but apportioned to the cutting department. And then what is the share of the assembly department? That's the power usage percentage. It will be given in the question. So power usage 50% goes to cutting, 25%. Now 25%. Take 0.25 of 50,000 now, and that would be allocated. 25% of 50,000 would be allocated to, which is basically 12,500. 12,500, it goes to assembly department, and then break 25% into 2, 25 divided by 2. So it is 12.5% each, 12.5% and 12.5%. So So 12.5% of 50,000 is 6250. 6250 6250 go to stores, and then 6250 also goes to maintenance department. That's how the sharing of the common cost is done. And sharing of the common cost is basically apportionment. Apportionment is where the common cost will be shared. Allocation is the process in which cost which is specific, which is directly traceable, it will be directly allocated to that respective department. So out of 2 lakh cost, allocated cost was 1 lakh and common cost was 1 lakh. What was the common cost breakup? It was rental cost of 50,000 and power cost of 50,000. That was the breakup. So rental we have divided amongst the production and service cost centers based upon the floor area, and power cost we have divided based upon the power usage, just like this. So 25,000, 12,500, 6250 was the share of stores, and then 6250 again was the share of maintenance department. So that's how the total of 50,000 has been shared amongst the department in the step of apportionment. And if you add up all these, definitely it will make the total. 6250, if it doesn't make the total, that means you haven't done the apportionment correctly. 12,500 plus 25,000, it has to make the total of 50,000 in this case. And then here as well, it has to make the total. 12,500, 12,500, 12,500, 12,500, it has to be equal to 50,000, right? So it gives you self-check. If the total isn't correct, that means you haven't done the apportionment correctly. For example, you went to a hotel and for example, you were 5 people, yeah, and 50,000 was the bill, yeah. So what would be the per head? Yeah, what would be the per head charge? I am just going to divide it amongst 5. So what would be the per share? So 50,000 would be when shared amongst you guys. So it will be 10,000 per person. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each will have 10,000. And if I add up 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, definitely it needs to be equal to the total cost. So that's what I mean by sharing of the cost, right? Got it? So the totals, the individual costs need to match the total column here. Okay. Now, what is the next step? Next step is reapportionment. If I come back here, the next step is reapportionment. Now, what happens in the reapportionment? Actually, you can see there is some cost arising in the service cost centers. There's some cost arising. If you add up the totals, okay, if you total the column, okay, now if you total allocated plus apportion cost, just total all the costs plus apportioned cost. Now, what is the total cost here for cutting department, here for assembly department, here for store, and here for maintenance department? 25,000. Let me total and put it here. You can help me do the calculation as well. Always participate in the class. Always do that. 25,000 plus 12,500 plus 25,000. I'm actually totaling the cost for cutting department, right? So the total is 62,500. Now if you total the assembly cost, it was 25,000 plus 12,500 plus 12,500. So it is 50,000 for assembly department, and there's some cost for stores as well. But store is a department which is there for the production cost center. If there won't be any production, definitely there's no need for service cost center. 25,000 plus 12,500 plus 6250 is the total cost of 43,750 for service cost center. And now there is cost for maintenance department, which is another service cost center, 25,000 plus 12,500 plus 6,250. So it is 4,3,750. So you see, there is some cost for service cost centers. In reapportionment, what we actually do, actually the concept is the entire production overhead cost needs to be traced to production cost center only, because in the absorption step all of the cost needs to be accumulated in the production cost centers, so that from production cost centers, in the process of absorption, the entire cost will be then absorbed into the entire cost is then absorbed into cost units, absorbed into products. Yeah. So service cost center cost needs to be nil and it has to be charged to production cost centers. So what is the reapportionment process? What we do in the reapportionment process, we are going to nil the entire cost of the service cost center, and that cost will be reapportioned, reshared amongst the production cost centers such as cutting department and assembly department here, so that the entire 2 lakh cost is actually gets accumulated in the production cost center, and that entire 2 lakh cost is then absorbed into the respective products. Because how we recover our cost, we actually recover our cost by selling the products, so the entire cost has to be absorbed into the products. So service cost center, giving cost to a service cost center, in allocation and apportionment, some of the cost was accumulated in the service cost center, but now in the reapportionment, we are actually going to transfer the service cost to production department, or we'll transfer the cost from the service cost centers to production cost centers, and that process is known as reapportionment. Why I called it reapportionment? Once the apportionment of common cost has been done, now why I call it reapportionment? Now I need to transfer this cost among cutting and assembly department. How? Means store cost of 43,750 now needs to be divided amongst cutting department and assembly department, and also maintenance cost of 43,750 also needs to be shared among cutting and assembly department. So why I call it reapportionment? Because apportionment is happening once again. Sharing of common cost. This cost is common to both production cost centers. Why? Because cutting material is also there in the store, and he's also cutting department is also asking for the material requisitions. Means, yeah, doing business internally, and also maintenance is also working for cutting department as well as assembly department. So maintenance cost of 43750 also needs to be charged to cutting as well as for assembly. But how I'm actually going to portion the cost? Just like I apportion rental cost on the basis of floor area and power cost on the basis of the power usage, maybe in the question you will be given the basis that how you're going to absorb the cost. How are you actually going to absorb the cost? For example, based upon the material requisitions. For example, the total material requisitions were 15, but 5 was for cutting department and 10 was for assembly department. So definitely more cost will be allocated, more of the store cost would be going to the department which is using it more, yeah, which is taking more benefits. So assembly department has got 10 material requisitions. So I'm going to calculate cost per material requisition. Divide the total cost of this with the total requisitions, for example, 15,000 in this case. Just the overview, we're going to do the calculation. So per acquisition, this is the cost. So cost for 5,000 requisitions will be charged to 14,583 will be charged to, okay. So you get the concept of how I'm going to apportion the cost. First of all, I'm apportioning reapportionment of stores based upon the material requisitions. So how much cost goes to 14,583, for example? 14,583 of the cost So this cost is nil, and 14,583 goes to cutting department, and how much goes to assembly department? For example, 43750 was the cost, and total material requisitions were 15,000, and 10,000 material requisitions was for assembly department. So 29167 of the cost, 29167 of the cost will go to assembly department. And if I'm going to add up both costs, 14583 plus 29167, it has to be equal to this figure, 43750. Okay, again, the same concept I told you for apportionment, because that's the sharing of the cost. So each cost should be equal to the total cost. Each cost being shared amongst the respective department needs to be equal to the total cost. So again, I need to nail the maintenance cost, and then respectively, I need to share it amongst cutting and machinery. For example, the usage was 50-50%. So all the apportionment basis and all the reapportionment basis would be mentioned in the question. And how you actually going to absorb the cost into products. For example, one product is A, the other product is B. The absorption basis, how you actually going to absorb the cost would also be mentioned in the question. So don't worry about the basis, that how the cost is actually going to be shared. So reapportionment we're doing now, we're going to nil the maintenance cost, and now here I am going to first I charge the reapportionment on the based upon the material requisitions, and now I'm going to reapportion the cost. Now comes the reapportionment of maintenance department, and for example, the ratio is 50:50. Yeah, 50% of the cost, so just divide the cost among two. 43750 divided by 2. So 21875, 21875, 21875. So this cost has been nil, and now this also has been charged to production. Okay, I didn't do the totals here. What was the total allocated and apportioned cost? It was, if you see, it was 62500 for cutting department, 50,000 for assembly department, plus 43750 for stores, and then 43750 again for maintenance department. So the total was 2 lakh. Yeah, we actually started with 2 lakh. You see that entire 2 lakh cost has to be absorbed into the products now, right? In the process of absorption. But before that, I need to allocate the cost to the respective specific cost to the respective department. Common cost will be shared upon some basis, like rental based upon floor area and kilowatt I shared. And reapportionment, I need to transfer the service cost to production cost centers on some basis again. For example, for stores, I have done on the basis of the material requisitions, and for maintenance based upon the usage. Okay, so in reapportionment, I nailed the service cost center cost of 43750 and 43750, and I actually charged it to production. So 14583 and 29167 was respectively charged to cutting and assembly department, and then out of this 50-50%, 2187 and 2187. So don't you think the entire cost earlier, out of that 2 lakh, there was 43750 times 2, and there was 87500 cost which was still lying in the service cost center. So in reapportionment, I brought that cost here as well on the top of 62500 plus 50,000. So now what is happening? The entire of 2 lakh cost is within the production cost. And now that entire 2 lakh cost, needs to be absorbed, yeah, needs to be absorbed into the products. For example, the products are A and B. So if I again do the totals, so now this cost is nil. This was 50,000, this was 2 lakh, okay, and now the entire cost is nil. This has come here like this, and now I can calculate the total budgeted. Everything is estimated. Now I'm going to calculate estimated cost per unit for A and B, which is the step of absorption. So I needed a total budgeted production overhead cost. Now I will call it production overhead because service cost center has also come to production cost center. And now what is the total for cutting department and what is the total for assembly department? Now I'm just going to do the total. So 6 to 500 was the share of allocated and apportioned cost for cutting department, and 14,583 is the share coming to cutting department from stores, because cutting department actually use stores. Okay, so got the cost as well. And 21875 was the cost share to cutting department from maintenance department, right? So what is the total cost share of cutting department? One production cost center is 98958. 98958. Now what is the share for machining department? Second department, which is assembly department. Okay. So it is 50,000 was the allocated and apportion cost, the directly traceable and the common cost. Yeah. And then 29167 is what this department got from stores. And then 21875 is the cost this department got from maintenance. So what is the cost? 101,042 is the cost. And if I add up this 98958, it has to be equal to 2 lakh. So the entire 2 lakh cost has been I've actually split it between the two production costs. I started with 4. I actually charged the cost, allocated cost to the respective production and service cost center, and apportioned the cost, common cost, to the respective production and service cost center. Then I actually brought all the cost from service to production. Why? Because the entire production cost has to be absorbed into products A and B, because services shouldn't get any cost. Service is only there for production, to serve the production cost centers. So the entire cost has to come here. That's why I have splitted the entire cost of 2 lakh into cutting and assembly department. So cutting department gets a share of 98958 and assembly department gets a share of 101,042. Now what happens in the step of absorption, and also what was the rationale of absorption costing, was to calculate production overhead cost per unit in order to calculate the total production cost and then value inventory and calculate profit at the same time. And also it wasn't the actual cost, was the estimated cost. Actual cost I will come to know at the end of the period. I told you this is the estimated cost. We are estimating at the start of the production, and I estimated it to be, in my earlier calculation, I estimated it to be 1 lakh, and I divided it among unit, and then I calculated the estimated cost per unit of 10. So how are you actually going to do that cost? Actual cost I will come, an actual activity level I will come to know at the end of the period. So this is just an estimation in order to calculate the total production cost. This total production cost is calculated as prime cost plus overhead cost. Prime cost plus overhead cost. So overhead cost is not a straightforward process. How overhead cost is absorbed into a cost unit in order to calculate the total production cost, it's not a straightforward process. I need to go through series of process, which is allocation, apportionment, reapportionment, and absorption. So what will happen in the absorption stage? I will actually absorb that entire 2 lakh cost into products, and two products are A and B. So what allocation step deals with? Charges cost, entire production cost to cost units. Okay, that is what the process of absorption is all about. So now the entire cost will be absorbed into, for example, there are two products A and B. It will be charged to two products A and B, and that particular process will be absorption. How I'm actually going to absorb the cost amongst A and B? I can do it on the basis of number of units. I can do it on the basis of number of machine hours. Yeah, I can do it on the basis of, for example, number of labor hours. Yeah, how I will actually do that? I will calculate a cost per machine hour, and whatever would be the machine hour consumed by A or machine hour used by B, cost would be shared. This cost would be shared accordingly amongst A and B. That is the absorption. Or for example, labor hour, I will divide the cost with total number of estimated labor hours, and then I will get cost per labor hour. And then I would know the total labor hours for A and B, and then respectively, I will absorb the cost among A and B. Or if I do it on the basis of the number of units, I'm actually going to absorb the cost among A and B directly amongst A and B, that what would the per unit, what would be the total cost allocated for A and B. So for example, from cutting department, the cost was absorbed in A and B because both this cost is again a common cost and needs to be absorbed amongst A and B. And also for cutting, from assembly department, the cost needs to be absorbed into two products, A and B. I'm not going to make it more complicated. I won't do the how the sharing would be done. I will just assume that, for example, 50-50% cost was absorbed. Yeah, in using any of these bases, 50-50% cost was absorbed. For example, what was the cost? 98958 is the cost. For example, divided by 2. So 49479 is the cost A is getting from cutting department. Yeah, and then 49479 is the cost B is also getting from cutting department. And now for assembly department, for example, if I say that 50-50% it will be divided amongst the products, so 101042 is the total cost. As you can see, if I'm going to share it amongst the two products, so on per head it will be 50 55 to 1 goes to A and 55 to 1 goes to B. Yeah. Okay. So what A gets from the assembly department, it's going to be 55 to 1. And what A gets from what B gets from assembly department, B gets from assembly department, so it's going to be 55 to 1. So if I add up both the costs, what would be the total cost for A and what would be the total cost for B? So it's going to be 55 to 1 plus 49479. So it's 1 lakh, cost of 1 lakh is for A, and again the cost of 1 lakh is for B. See how this total cost, and if I add both the costs, which was initially this and this, that was also 2 lakh. Yeah, this cost is 2 lakh. So that's how the entire cost of 2 lakh was now shared amongst A and B, where A get a cost of 1 lakh and B get a cost of 1 lakh as well. See, that was the entire aim. Yeah, that was the entire aim. And how I calculate the overhead cost per unit, that was the total cost. For example, 10,000 units were there for A and 10,000 units were there for B. So I can actually calculate the cost per unit for each. It was 10 per unit, 10 per unit. And my aim was achieved, that how I actually absorb the overhead cost into one cost units. The process of absorption has been done here. Process of absorption, the final process, fourth process has been done here. See, now the cost has been absorbed like this. So that is the rationale I told you for absorption costing. It values inventory on the basis of production cost. So production cost is sum of direct cost and indirect cost. So prime cost is easily chargeable, but production overhead is complicated process. How are you actually going to absorb it? So absorption costing gives you guideline how you're going to value the inventory, calculate total production cost. So you do it in the set of processes which are known as allocation, apportionment, reapportionment, and then in the absorption step, final absorption step, the cost is actually charged to products, is actually charged to cost units. So I started from 2 lakh and now 2 lakh, A and B get a share of 1 lakh each and per unit cost of 10 per unit. So that's how I calculated the overhead cost per unit. And that is what you're going to study in overhead chapter. That was a good introduction of the overhead chapter. Okay. So this is the question. It tells you the figure of total factory overhead. Okay, I told you we need to calculate the overhead cost, production overhead cost per unit in the step of absorption costing. So it doesn't deal with prime cost or a direct cost. So it will, entire focus will be on production overhead cost. So I started from total factory overhead cost was 2 lakh. However, allocated overheads were 50,000. So 2 lakh was the total overhead cost. And if you minus the allocated cost was 50,000. So what is the rest of the cost? Which is a common cost. Rest of the cost would be a common cost. So the common cost was 1 lakh 50,000. Okay. So breakup is as follows. Breakup of what? Breakup of allocated cost is as follows. That 20, what was the breakup of that 50,000 was like this. There was cutting department, there was machining department, there's one department stores, and then one department known as maintenance. So how the breakup was? Breakup was that you're going to make the same tables like, yeah, I did, like the one cutting department, one for machining department, one for stores, and then one for maintenance department. And then you're going to write the allocated cost first, and then the apportioned cost will come. So allocated cost 50,000, 20,000 relates to cutting department, 10,000 relates to machining department. I'm going to write it like this: 20,000, 10,000, stores 10,000, and maintenance 10,000, and then I'm going to make a column of total as well. So total would be 50,000. And then the rest of the common cost breakup was like this. Portion overhead bases are like this. 1 lakh was the rental cost. So out of that, 1 lakh was the rental cost, 1 lakh 50,000, and then power cost was 50,000. Now, how they will be shared, I told you the basis would be mentioned in the question. So the rental cost is 1 lakh. So if 1 lakh is shared amongst the total factory area is 25,000 square feet. If I share the entire cost of 1 lakh amongst the entire floor area of 25,000, I get a cost of 4 per square meter, right? I get a cost of 4 per square meter. And now what would be the rental share for cutting department? Cutting department occupies 5,000 square feet out of that 25,000. Machining department occupies 10,000, 2,000, 5,000. If you add up this as well, it will be equal to 25. So per square feet cost was 4. So 4 into 5,000, cutting department gets a share of 20,000. So same like this, you're going to apportion the cost like this. And also for power cost, it will be done on the basis of the usage. So 50%, 30, that becomes 80% of the cost is consumed by a production cost center, and the rest 10, 20% of the cost is consumed by the service cost centers. So the power cost of 50,000 will be shared amongst just like this. And then you will sum all, and then you'll get the allocated and portion overhead. Then you will see that there's some cost which is still lying in the production cost centers, and ultimately the aim is to calculate the total overhead absorbed amongst the two products P1 and P2, which is the absorption step. So for that, I need to reapportion the service cost to production department. I need to reapportion the service cost. See, I told you the basis would be mentioned in the question. So whatever the store department cost would be, yeah, or whatever the maintenance cost, the cost would be, you need to nil that cost, and then you need to charge it. How are you going to charge it? To cutting and machining department 50-50%. Yeah. And then how are you going to charge the maintenance department cost like 70-30? You share it. So finally, what will happen? The entire of the 2 lakh cost would be traced with production cost centers, cutting and machinery. And now just try to do the absorption as well in this question. We'll redo this question, but do this question as an assignment. Okay. And what are the bases? Both product P1 and P2. Okay. Absorption bases are as follows. Overhead absorbed on the basis of labor hours. Overhead are absorbed on the basis of the labor hours. And requirement is you need to calculate total production overhead absorbed both for product P1 and P2 using separate overhead absorption rates. Separate overhead absorption rates, or using separate departmental overhead absorption. Separate departmental overhead absorption rate. So there are two types of absorption rates. One is a blanket rate that doesn't need the entire cost to be split into two production departments. As you have seen in my question as well, and as well as in this question, we're actually going to split the entire cost of 2 lakh into, finally you'll be splitting it into two production cost centers, cutting and machinery. And now from cutting and machinery, the cost will be shared amongst P1 and P2, and also in machining, the cost will be shared among two products, P1 and P2, that we have produced, and on the basis of number of labor hours. And you're also given the labor hour per unit for P1. 1 unit of P1 consume how many hours in cutting department is 4, and P2 consume how many hours in cutting department? It's 2 per unit. Yeah. And same P1 consume how many hours in machining department? It's 1 hour and 6 hours, just like that. Okay. In blanket overhead absorption rates, I don't need to split the cost into two departments. Yeah. I'm only going to split the cost when I'm going to absorb the cost by splitting the total cost into two departments. And then the products will take a share of cost from both the departments. Like if I want to calculate the P1 cost, it will be the P1 cost would be, the total cost would be the share it gets from cutting department and the share it gets from machining department. Because P1 also spends some time in cutting and machining department, so definitely it takes the cost. And how it going to take the cost? Definitely it's going to take the cost based upon the labor hours or whatever basis mentioned in the question. Could be machine hour, could be number of units. Just like that, if I want to take the cost, since the cost has been split into cutting and machinery, because now the absorption rates being used as separate departmental absorption rates. So now if I want to calculate the total cost for P2, it's going to be sum of cost it gets from cutting and machining. If it was blanket rate, the cost hadn't been split into departments, production cost centers. So now I didn't need to get the cost from both departments. It's actually never been splitted. Do you know the blanket of fire takes everything? It covers everything. It would be a factory-wide rate. I don't need to split the factory cost amongst departments. It's just the concept of absorption. This is blanket rate and separate departmental. So just try to do this question. How you actually, first of all, you will get one cost in cutting department and one cost in machining department. And then you will divide how you will calculate the separate absorption rate for cutting and machining department. You will do it like this. Total budgeted production overhead, what you got after allocation, apportionment, reapportionment in cutting department, that would be divided by total estimated budgeted